All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Welcome to the National Environmental Health Association's webinar titled Impact of Climate Change on Alaskan Native Communities. My name is Gina Baer, and I'm the Associate Director for Programs and Partnership Development here at NEHA, and I will be moderating the webinar today. As you see, there is a poll question up. When do you expect that people in North America will be harmed from the effects of climate change? And it looks like we have a pretty good response here right now. It looks like about 90% of you think this is already happening. So the 2023 National Climate Assessment agrees with you. According to this report, since 1970, the lower 48 states have started warming by 2.5 degrees Fahrenheit, and Alaska has heated up by 4.2 degrees Fahrenheit, compared to the global average of 1.7 degrees. The report also states that climate change is harming physical, mental, spiritual, and community health and well-being through the increasing frequency and intensity of extreme events, increasing cases of infectious and vector-borne diseases, and declines in food and water quality and security. And I think we're going to be hearing a lot more about this from our speakers today. Today's webinar focuses on highlighting the environmental health impacts of climate change on Alaskan Native communities, including its impacts on food sovereignty, food safety, mental and behavioral health, cultural and spiritual practices, resiliency, and adaptation. We will also hear from our local Alaskan organizations on how they are addressing these impacts in the communities they work with. The webinar will begin with a presentation on NEHA's research and findings, and will go into a facilitated discussion with our 3 panelists. The panel discussion will be followed by a Q&A session. Allow me to cover a few housekeeping items before we get started. Please note, this webinar is being recorded. The webinar recording will be uploaded onto the NEHA website. We will take questions upon completion of the presentations. Please feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A box throughout the presentation, and we will address your questions after the panel discussion with the remaining time we have left. At the conclusion of the webinar, you'll also be directed to take part in a short evaluation. Please complete this brief survey, as we really would appreciate your feedback. Let's get into today's webinar. Today, we have 3 panelists: Estelle Thompson, Jacqueline Schaefer, and Amy Chang. Estelle Thompson is an enrolled member of the Native village of Paimute as a descendant of one of the original 5 families of Paimute. As a displaced tribe, her hometown is the southwestern Bering Sea coast community of Hooper Bay. She has previously served as the Paimute people, as the Tribal Court Program Director, a tribal and government consultant, and continues to serve as a member on her tribe's governing body, the Native Village of Paimute Traditional Council. Currently, Estelle is a Traditional Council Officer and works as the Grants and Tribal Development Officer for the Native Village of Paimute. She is a board member for the Alaska Wildlife Alliance, a steering committee member for the Western Alaska Partnership, and a commissioner for the Yukon River Intertribal Fish Commission, and a working member of the Catalyst Fund for Indigenous Communities. Estelle has been a core member of the work that we have done here at NEHA on this Alaska project, and we very much value her input and the perspectives she brings. So welcome, Estelle. Jackie Catalina Schaefer, an Inupiaq from Kotzebue, Alaska, is the Director of Climate Initiatives Program at the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium, under the Department of Community Environment and Health. For decades, she has worked across Alaska holistically, infusing Indigenous knowledge into a variety of sectors she has experience in, including comprehensive planning, energy, housing, water security, sanitation, and climate change adaptation for rural communities. Her passion is to serve the Indigenous people of Alaska and provide Indigenous perspectives to all of her work, including the importance and recognition of traditional philosophies, knowledge, and worldviews. Her current work includes climate change assessments, community engagement, community relocation oversight, and overseeing the Center for Climate and Health and the Center for Environmentally Threatened Communities within the Climate Initiatives Program. Our final panelist is Amy Chang. Amy is a senior program analyst at NEHA and provides project oversight for climate change and emergency preparedness projects. She has over 10 years of experience working at the national associations and provides support on various environmental health programs. Amy will start off with a presentation on NEHA's climate change impacts on Alaskan Native Communities project. After the presentation, we will divide into the facilitated panel discussion. Amy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gina. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amy from NEHA, and we're very excited to share what we learned about the impacts of climate change on Alaskan Native communities. Next slide. So local environmental public health professionals play a critical role in addressing the health and well-being of their communities and environments, and are well positioned to address health inequities that are exacerbated by climate change and environmental injustice. So our role here at NEHA is to build, sustain, and empower an effective environmental health workforce by prioritizing support for local jurisdictions and environmental public health professionals to protect their community from climate change-related environmental health hazards. For this project, our goal was to raise visibility among the environmental public health community of the often unseen cultural and systemic impacts of climate change on Indigenous communities in Alaska. Particularly, we wanted to develop a photojournal and manuscript that illustrates the climate's effects on food sovereignty, mental health, as well as highlighting the resiliency of Alaskan Natives. So as you can see on the screen, we partner with many groups from this project. First of all, we are funded by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention for this project. So without their support, we couldn't get the story out to you. So thank you. We also work closely with the Alaskan Native Tribal Health Consortium, or ANTHC, and the Alaskan Wildlife Alliance, AWA. We have representatives, as we talked about, from both groups today and serve as panelists, and they'll share more about their work during their panel discussion. We also worked with numerous other tribal partners, individuals, and families to learn more about and document the impacts of climate change on Alaska Natives. And to all of them, thank you so much. So get into it. Climate change is harming Alaska. Alaska is at the forefront of climate change, which is impacting the people, wildlife, and the environment. Alaska's climate has been warming 3 to 4 times as quickly as the global average since the 1950s. The increasing temperatures have also physically and biologically altered Alaska's land. The impact on the land includes such things as permafrost degradation, increasing coastal erosion, and changing vegetation due to intensifying wildfires and elevated temperatures. Thawing permafrost compromises important infrastructure such as building and pipeline foundations, road and power lines, and wastewater containments. The increasing risk of more and larger and frequent wildfires pose a direct risk to human health by elevating smoke and particulate matter. Climate change in Alaska is also modifying Arctic marine ecosystems and decreasing the average annual sea ice coverage. And the marine ecosystem in Alaska is a major part of the economy and a source for subsistence harvests. As estimated, around $3 to $7 billion are needed to address these impacts between 2008 and 2030. So Alaska Native tribes all are vulnerable. It's impossible to separate Alaska Natives from their environment or ignore the profound impacts that climate change is having on their very existence. The environment is key not only to their physical existence, but also to their spiritual and cultural way of life. Due to their deep social economic ties with ecological systems and the institutional barriers that limit their ability to adapt to the rapid and social changes, Alaska Natives are disproportionately vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Alaska is home to 40% of the nearly 600 federally recognized tribes in the US. And there are 229 tribes that consist of 5 groups of Alaska Native people with 20 distinct cultures and 300 different dialects. So in this project, again, we're looking at the impact of climate change on Alaska Native tribes, specifically food sovereignty, mental behavioral health, community, cultural, spiritual practices, resiliency and adaptations, and provide some actions for audience. And this project is featured in the December 2023 issue of the Journal of Environmental Health. And it looks like we popped a link in their chats for you to access. In this project, or in this presentation, we only touched lightly on, from this presentation, the impacts of climate change on food sovereignty in the context of food safety, impact on climate impacts of land and on cultural practices, and share some resources that may be helpful for environmental health professionals in engaging with Native peoples. So talking about climate change impacts on food sovereignty, maintaining food sovereignty not only allows Alaska Native peoples to pass down longstanding traditions and culture to future generations, but the practice also provides the residents with food that is needed for survival and achieve food security. The high cost of living for rural Alaskan communities have, with limited and expensive imported items such as staples like bread and milk, really make it unsustainable to rely on imported items for daily sustenance. The climate change impacts on food sovereignty. The warmer temperatures and higher humidity have also affected the safety of harvested meats and seafood through such things as algal blooms that could produce harmful toxins to humans when consumed, and through thawing ice cellars that had been traditionally been used to store food. Thawing permafrost from warmer temperatures have also poses health threats to Alaska Natives by releasing man-made and naturally formed pollutants. So these pollutants can enter drinking water sources and cause additional water and food safety and security issues. So many Alaska Natives have turned to some Western prepackaged foods, which we said was not only expensive and limited, but also bad for health, increasing obesity and diabetes rates in Alaska Native populations. Here you see a quote from one of our panelists, Estelle Thompson, about the changes to environmental effects on cultural practices. So cultural and spiritual connections can be severed through accelerated physical environmental changes caused by a warming climate, and such as terrestrial processes that include permafrost thaw, coastal river erosion, glacier melts, and wildfires and storms. So these processes can destroy and damage not only communities, but cultural and spiritually significant and immovable sites, including historical structures, landscapes, buildings, archaeological sites, and ancestral lands at an accelerated pace. So for centuries, Alaska Natives' strong cultural ties bolstered by traditional subsistence harvesting and resource sharing between networks of individuals and communities have been key to their resilience and ability to adapt. Another important factor to Alaska Natives' resiliencies and adaptive abilities was their nomadic lifestyle that enabled communities to move freely to different regions where subsistence resources were abundant through changing seasons. Institutional barriers, including federal laws and regulations, do often neglect indigenous needs and limit their abilities to respond to rapid ecological changes. So adaptation does require partnership with the government. successful resilience and adaptation to climate change requires a co-management between Alaskan Natives and state and federal governments instead of the current limited cooperative agreements. So co-management would allow Alaskan Natives to collaborate with the government and make decisions that incorporate traditional Native knowledge, science, values, and management practices. A refocus on enculturation and shift back to Alaska Native perspectives can also be beneficial to improving mental health resiliency by minimizing the stress of climate change. So some consideration for engagement with Native peoples. Local, national, and international policies and decisions do impact the daily lives of Indigenous peoples, including their sovereignty, food security, health, environment, and more. Indigenous peoples need to be more than just a stakeholder in these discussions. They need to be need to be put in a prominent driver of these decisions that impact their communities. So in working with the community, it's important to spend time, money, and energy and understand their values and protocols for engagement. Environmental public health and other local government agencies need to acknowledge that inequity as a structured system and not based solely on individuals. Agencies and organizations need to integrate and institutionalize equality and social justice concepts and values into the policies, procedures, practices, norms, and values. The following are resources provided to start for a starting place for promoting the health equity lens within your agency or organization. A link to these resources are available in the chat box. And really concluding, the ecological changes in Alaska are far-reaching and impact beyond the state. Such impacts of melting glaciers and subsequent sea level rise are impacting on a global level around the coastal areas and beyond. So whether or not we live in Alaska, there is an important message for us all. We all need to work in unity to be able to successfully be resilient, mitigate, and adapt to the impacts of climate change. That concludes my presentation. Back to you, Gina.
Thank you for that presentation, Amy. We will now move on to the facilitated discussion portion of the webinar. Please welcome again Estelle Thompson, Jacqueline Schaefer, and Amy Chang. I have to point out that Estelle is coming to us from some travel. She has been so gracious, even though she is in the middle of travel, she is joining us today. So we are going to start first with Estelle and ask a few questions. Estelle, if you could introduce yourself again to our viewers, and can you speak a little bit about how the changing climate has impacted your village's hunting and fishing practices?
Absolutely. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. My Yupik calling name is Anrutkara. It means the one who is supposed to be a man, or more accurately, in the language, we don't have a word for man. I mean, the man is a tool for providing, so I am the one who will provide. As far as what it's done with our traditional gathering practices, it's thrown everything up in the air. Over the past 4 or 5 years, we've had an enormous salmon crash that has affected all the villages of the YK region and all the way up the Yukon. So we are salmon culture. We are salmon culture, and it really. Sorry about that. We are salmon culture, so it. We have to have more of a reliance on store-bought or other types of, and one of the things, sorry about that, it's really impacted the way that we've been able to harvest our foods. Not having salmon for my people is completely and totally devastating. As a kid, I grew up having salmon in some form every single day, and I haven't had any more traditionally prepared salmon I think I had a bite when I was back home in January, but I hadn't had any traditionally prepared salmon from my family or my home in years. It's impacted the way that our men are able to go out and hunt our sea mammals, which we depend on very heavily with the thinning sea ice and also the lack of solid ice. We've had more people fall into the waters. The times that we are able to hunt the seals has changed. Everything has moved up at least a month in terms of gathering or harvesting our plants, our berries, our eggs, our fish, everything. And it's caused a great deal of food insecurity amongst our tribal members. We just recently had a climate forum in my village, and we were talking about these apologies. Apologies. The sorry about that. It has created a lot of insecurity and anxiety within our people, because for us, we spent our entire year working around the calendar to schedule what we're supposed to be doing. And for us, we're experiencing things that have been never experienced before in our lifetime. So our villagers are becoming more and more dependent upon store-bought foods, or we're looking at different ways to actually supplement the foods that we get.
Thank you, Estelle. I know some of the viewers are experiencing some of the audio difficulties. Estelle is traveling, so she is trying to navigate the airport there, and we're experiencing some difficulties, but thank you, Estelle, for joining us. We do very much appreciate your insights and contributions. I will turn now over to Jackie Schaefer. Jackie, I have a lot of questions for you, and I think that you might have a presentation to help answer some of them. But how long has the Alaskan Native Tribal Health Consortium been engaged in climate change related work? What are some of the projects you're working on? What are some of the major gaps you're seeing? And what are actions that viewers can take? So I'll turn it over to you, Jackie.
Yeah, Vlalota. I'm in the middle of travel as well, but I happen to snag a boardroom. So hello from Lawrence, Kansas. Ovanga Atiga Catalina, Inupainarunga, Nirunga, Kikiktarumi. I'm Jackie Catalina Schaefer, born and raised in Kikiktaru, which is on the northwest coast of Alaska, just north of where Estelle is from. I was raised in a very traditional Inupiaq lifestyle. And as the director of climate initiatives for the Alaskan Native Tribal Health Consortium, the impacts are far greater than any response we could actually have. But it's really important to understand that both Estelle and I are fighting not only to save our cultures and our traditional methods of living and food resources, but also because if the Arctic doesn't stay frozen, the global impacts will be devastating. So it's a big load, and the Alaskan Native Tribal Health Consortium, in partnership with NOAA, formed a initiative through their Climate and Equity Challenge. About a year ago, we stood up our program, and under the program, we house 2 centers, as Gina mentioned. One is really a response to community requests for help. in protecting infrastructure that is impacted by either flooding, erosion, or permafrost adaptation. And the other center is looking at the cross vector of disease when it comes to climate impacts affecting plants, food, plants, animals, and people. And so anything such as rabies or avian flu that kind of jumps cross vector from one species to another, that is another concern that we see that's impacting health as these climate impacts accelerate. And so the consortium has taken a more proactive response in standing up a climate program. Would you like me to share some of those slides now, Gina, to answer those questions?
Yeah, we have plenty of time, so please go ahead and do that. I think they'll be really valuable for our viewers.
Okay, let me see if I could get to that slideshow. 1 second. Yeah, so the consortium has worked on recently publishing an unmet needs report when it comes to climate change, and really looking at what are the things that we could do that could really help us understand what's happening and how rapid it's happening, as well as looking at some of the devastating impacts and looking at innovative ways to respond. Here we go. Let me get to this. Sorry, my internet here is not very stable either, so I'm having a very difficult time sharing. It worked when we practiced, but it's not working now. So let me just try this again. Okay, here we go. And let me know if you could see it okay. Oops. I am going to attempt to adjust this so that we're in presentation mode. And I don't see where it is. Sorry, folks. You have two very busy Alaskan women trying to maneuver through Zoom and through the, the technologies that our villages face every day.
You're doing great.
Okay, so this is some of the response we've done at the consortium across the state. And really, up until now, it really has been reactive. And so what we're trying to do is look at a more proactive way to respond and plan so that our communities have the information and the data needed to make informed decisions when it comes to their communities. And the consortium is a unique compact of our tribes across the state. And so they get to make the decisions on their own. And so the climate initiatives and the unmet needs report are really our most active projects. All right, now it's not letting me change my slide. Let's see. I'm so sorry about this. This is so difficult when the internet's not happening. Okay, here we go. So this is really agency coordination. This is what a tribe faces. And you look at the web of federal funders that come to respond in small pockets of money, and you're looking at this giant web of agencies that one person in a community may have to maneuver through. So what we're trying to do is offer technical support and help them maneuver this web of agencies. And really this technical assistance that we offer, you know, when you have one person in a community that is a population of 200 or 300 people, that is a big load for one person to take on. And they don't have the infrastructure such as cities do. One, they're off the road system. Two, they're small in population, so their capacity is limited. And three, the knowledge base and the access to the internet with unstable internet services makes it really difficult. I am in a city and in the middle of the United States and I'm having internet issues. These are communities that are out remote situations where they have to fly into their communities. So their internet is very unstable. So really we just need to support them and allow them to make their own community decisions. So we look at specific hazard data and analysis per community in order to understand what's happening in our communities. we need to understand the risks they're facing. And then once we know those risks, then we could plan for it and then help them connect to funding to implement projects to either protect in place, mitigate away from danger, or a full relocation if that's necessary. And we do have 144 communities that are environmentally threatened by climate impacts in our state. So we recently released the Unmet Needs Report for Alaska Native environmentally threatened villages. And in that report, we offer 3 recommendations to Congress and to funding agencies. Currently, our tribes compete with all tribes across the United States for funding to respond to climate impacts. That puts our small communities in a very inequitable position. So we ask that a single funding source based on risk be put in place. We have an $80 million funding gap. That is a high number to respond, but when you compare it to other federal funding mechanisms, say for the Department of Defense, this is just a drop in the bucket. And this is based on risk, so it's based on people's lives at risk and not just the community infrastructure. So recommendation 2 is to remove the barriers to equity. Our communities, you saw the web of agencies that they have to go through. And those, when you base it on a national scale, 1, we don't have stable internet, in some places very limited stable power. And 2, you have one person trying to do the work of an entire division at a municipality or a city where they have planners and they have designers and engineers on staff. This is just a person who has grown up in a village trying to maneuver in this space with all these barriers. And the other is to look at a whole of government implementation framework for our state. Why? Because we want our communities to make decisions with the best information they can access. If we don't do that and provide them a safety net, then we put them in yet another inequitable decision-making space. And so our goal is to make sure that whatever that community strives for their people, that they have access to funding and resources, technical assistance that could help them create that safe and healthy community. And this is just in the report. Again, these are recommendations. This is not the tell-all. This is something that we sat down and talked about. And really, like, how could we create a team of experts in modeling, experts in science, experts in research, experts that could help support a community to mitigate the threats that they face with climate change. And really, that is kind of where we're at. Some other current projects that we're doing is a statewide landscape assessment to look at the capacity at the regional level. We are a statewide tribal health network. We have communities that don't have the regional support, so they hopscotch to the state level. And that is not a sustainable way to respond when you are I don't know if I answered all your questions, but hopefully that helped.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's really impressive to see the work that you have been doing over the years, and it's increasing more and more every year, and I think it's pretty impressive. I might have some more questions for you, but let's jump to Amy next. Amy, when you were working on this project in manuscript, what was one of the biggest considerations that you took in when you were doing this work in Alaska?
Right, and Gina, you worked on this project as well, so let's give recognition to Gina. So when we went to Alaska, going to this project, really, I think the first thing was the importance of involving Alaskan Natives from the beginning, and then really incorporating and acknowledging the importance of including indigenous knowledge, and when we enter into conversations, do a lot of research and conversation and entering them with humility and respect. So know that we don't know a lot and asking for that help and acknowledging that there's a lot more indigenous knowledge that we have to incorporate and include in there.
For sure. I really learned so much working on this project. And I think, one point that Amy and I tried to hold close to our hearts when we were doing this manuscript is we're not telling our story. This isn't our story to tell. We are telling the story of Alaskan Natives, and that's why working with Estelle and Jackie was so important, and all of the local people that we talked to for key informant interviews. This isn't our story. We're just trying to share their story, and it was very meaningful. Estelle, how are you feeling there? Do you think you would be able to pop in for one more question?
Yes, absolutely. I actually just found a quiet little and so ask away.
Perfect. Well, I'll give you one more question here that hopefully you'll be able to answer for us. I know that your village has faced a lot of extreme weather events and impacts from climate change. Can you talk a little bit about your village's resilience and adaptation with all of the things that have been happening there? And maybe you can even give the viewers a little background about some of those extreme weather impacts you faced.
Right. Well, where we're situated, my village is actually on the southwestern Bering Sea coast of Alaska. And we only had some small protections from the Bering Sea. We have a bay that we're situated in, but we were also protected by a set of sand dunes, 5 sand dunes, rows of sand dunes that kept us from feeling the biggest brunt of the might of the Bering Sea. Back a few years ago, when Typhoon Merbok hit my village, it knocked out all those rows of sand dunes. We've been experiencing coastal erosion for a great deal of time. We have sand that frequently ends up hitting the end of our airstrip, which is really not fun. And then we also have riverine erosion, permafrost melt. We've got all sorts of things that are happening both to the land and to the water. We just completed a climate vulnerability study that was heartbreaking for me. Looking at the data that we were able to find out about how fast our climate is changing, that made me cry. From the climate vulnerability study and a recent permafrost evaluation, all the permafrost in the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta is going to be completely gone by 2040. We initially thought it was going to be something that was, we had maybe 20 more years, but 20, 30 more years, but we only really have 15, 16 left before all the permafrost is gone. And that's if things don't speed up. If things keep going at the current rate, we will have about 15 more years before all the permafrost is melted. With that climate vulnerability study, it also mentioned that we would be subsumed by the Bering Sea by the end of the century. So all of that area is going to be underwater. As far as storms go, our weather events are becoming more and more frequent and also more and more powerful. Typhoon Merbok itself displaced 37 people from their homes, and out of a village of about 1,500 people. It doesn't seem like it's a lot, but that's a significant part of our population. 3 of those homes were completely destroyed. one snapped in half with the rising waters from Merbok that inundated our land. We had a house float away, and then we also had other damage that has really significantly impacted our ability to get fresh water. The freshwater lakes that we get some of our water from have been salinized, so we cannot get them anymore. And from the vulnerability study and from the climate modeling that we've done, we see that not only are we to expect additional weather events like Typhoon Merbok in our future, but they're going to become more frequent and also more unpredictable. So as you see, it's a lot to kind of have to be faced with. And for my village, when Jackie was talking about these people within our communities that are taking on, the roles of an entire department, that's me. My village, we're a displaced tribe. There's only about 105 of us. And we've been, because we're displaced, our people live in the neighboring villages of Hooper Base, Skamame, and Cheevac. So what that does for us, as far as the land goes, is it makes us understand the necessity to move, and also gives us a huge sense of urgency. So we've been working with people all over the place to help us increase our capacity so that we can move our village, resettle our village, because like I said, we don't have that much time. We've got like 16 years for the permafrost, and then we also have till the end of the century, until there's going to be completely covered with water. So one of the agencies and organizations that we've been partnering with, we're working not only on the climate vulnerability study, but also on a climate adaptation plan. And what that adaptation plan looks like, it is going to allow us some different options. So we've taken the information from the vulnerability study and met with the communities and shared exactly what was happening in our area. And we had a couple meetings last month where we went out to the village, and we were able to present the information, and we got some feedback from the community as to what they wanted to do. And so what we're doing in my village is a combination of two things. We are going to fight like crazy to make sure that we can stay in the area as long as possible. So we're doing things like replanting beach ryegrass. And we're also settled really well. So we're also doing things like adding additional not soil, but sediment on top of our wetlands to increase the height of the wetlands. So we can at least, provide a little bit more stability and increase the amount of earth that we're working with. And then the other things that we're going to be looking at doing include things like repopulating our area with things that haven't been there for a really long time, like wood bison or reindeer. Then we also have things that we're looking at, like planting kelp forests outside of our bay to help alleviate some of the heavy wave action that is helping to erode our coast. So, I mean, we have a lot of things that we're working on. And as I said, we've worked with so many different partners and organizations, various universities, University of Alaska Fairbanks, Alaska Pacific University. We have people that we're working with here, or we're going to be working with in New Zealand. we're working with some folks on a migratory bird project. If people are not aware, the area that I'm from, the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, is home to over 200 species of migratory birds from all over the world. And sometimes it's the only place in the world that these species nest, like our emperor geese and our black brant. So those are both geese. One of the reasons that I'm going to New Zealand is because we have a bird that's in common with, we have a cultural and spiritual significance to birds from with other indigenous people all over the world. And we figure that the best way for us to actually create more of a foothold and a foothold in not only conservation but also environmental and climate work is to enlist the help of other indigenous people like ourselves who can help boost our story, but also, maybe expand our resources. So we're working with tribes in New Zealand, in Australia, and we're working on creating additional partners in various areas of the world where the migratory birds winter.
Thank you for that, Estelle. I remember when we started on this project together, and you and Jackie and Amy and I were all talking, and we were talking about like what should the focus of our work be on. And I remember you both saying it is so hard to think about a thing because you are so connected to the environment. You're just so interwoven, it's hard to kind of separate it and compartmentalize it. And I think, just looking at the challenges that you're facing, and it's everything. It's the food, it's the culture, it's the inner spiritual workings of your communities. It's not just one thing that's being affected. So I think that's important for everyone to understand. Jackie, I know you talked a little bit in your presentation about, I think you mentioned there were 144 threatened communities. Are you actively right now working to relocate communities, or do you think that's something that will be happening to some of these other communities in the near future, as well as Estelle was talking about that's happening in her community right now?
Yeah, I would say there probably isn't a community in the state of Alaska that isn't being impacted by some type of climate change issue. The inequitable piece of this is that our communities in rural Alaska were at Western contact. They were colonized but not modernized. So we're still dealing with inequities that are determinants to health, such as lack of water and sanitation systems. When you have a community that has river erosion, ocean erosion, and permafrost melt all on top of no water and sanitation services, it's just layers and layers of compounding trauma and issues, right? So if you have any underlying health issues and you have a storm like the remnants of Typhoon Merbok that Estelle mentioned, completely wash away all your traditional food resources and the fish camp and the boat, and in her case, and a house. How do you recover from that when you're already in this non-equitable space as an American citizen? And so we have to look at this, the uniqueness of our cultures is, I'm sure Estelle's maybe even longer than mine, but in my case, my family has lived and thrived, and I eat the same foods as my ancestors in the same geographic space on the planet for 500 generations. And when you think about that, how many people could say that? And it just elevates the importance of making sure that we do this right, because we have future generations that are depending on us to make sure that as we adapt, because we've adapted for over 500 generations, that we're able to adapt in appropriate fashion without so many regulations and land designated restrictions that don't allow us to do that. And unfortunately, we don't have the privilege of time. So I think that, you know, out of the 144 environmentally threatened communities, we used to say we have about a dozen that need to fully relocate and about 30 that need to do managed or strategic retreat from, you know, maybe hopscotching away from danger. But I would say what we're seeing is the trend is shifting where those communities that maybe were low risk are now medium risk, and then the medium risk are high risk, and the high risk are being put into that eminently threatened risk, right? So we're having, I don't know that we have the privilege of time to gather enough capacity to respond accordingly, because currently we can't even access the funding in an equitable fashion. And so it makes it very difficult. So the call to action is, you know, we need Congress to really look at this through a lens of, these are not just Alaskan issues. These are going to be global impacts, and the impacts to the US are those unpredictable storms and rivers of water falling out of the sky. These are all interconnected because of atmospheric change, because of what's happening on the planet. And so we need to recognize it from that global scale, and every one of us do a call to action to make sure that as human beings, we have a chance to survive on this planet.
Thank you, Jackie. I think that is right to the point. I am sure our viewers that aren't in Alaska, that work in other places in the US and the lower 48s can attest to things are, you know, happening there too. When I was at Boulder County Health Department in Colorado, I can't even count the number of wildfires that we responded to. We had the major flooding in 2013. So you're right. This isn't just about what's happening in Alaska. This is a global threat, although there are some very unique challenges faced in Alaska. So thank you for that response. Amy, I think I'll do one more question for you, and then Taryn, if you can look in the Q&A, and we'll see if we can get to some of those questions in the Q&A chat before we sign off. But Amy, how can NEHA members, environmental health professionals, start to engage in climate health and climate justice in their everyday work?
Yeah, so I think at the end of the presentation, I did share some links with materials, examples for a starting place in promoting health equity lens within agencies, organization. And we also have a document they created the last year or so that provides examples of how to integrate environmental justice and climate health into your environmental public health programs. It's really broken out into different environmental public health topics, such as air quality and food safety, and so on, and talks about the impacts of climate change and health equity considerations within that each topic. It also provides specific examples of how to integrate environmental justice and climate health within the framing of environmental public health assessments and policies, how to incorporate that into cross-sectoral engagements that you may be working on, as well as incorporating EJ and climate health into your education and outreach activities. So I believe, yeah, the link is in the chat box for that document. So that may be a good starting place to look at, and some of the links provided at the end of the presentation.
Thank you so much for that. And thank you, Estelle, Jackie, and Amy so much for that great conversation. We really appreciate you providing your insights and experience with us. I'm looking in the Q&A box right now, and I think the panelists have been so efficient in responding to the questions that I think that they may have all been answered. I think we'll be putting some contact information for you all in the chat here before we sign off. And as a reminder, this is recorded so that if you want to review it and other questions pop up, you can absolutely get a hold of us later. But again, thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our viewers. Please feel free to contact us with any further questions regarding today's webinar. You can find our email support@neha.org in the chat. And just, we really appreciate you for attending today's webinar on climate change's impact on Alaska Native communities. All attendees will receive an email with a link to a SurveyMonkey poll to complete an evaluation for today's webinars. And we really would appreciate your feedbacks, your comments, suggestions, any other climate related topics that you would like us to present on. We would love to hear your feedback. So thanks for joining us, and we will see you next time. Enjoy the rest of your day.